Chapter 1. Shadows in Forest. Darkness was falling over the forest of ancient winds, covering everything with a dense fog that crept through the tall trees. Like motionless sentinels of long ago, a faint rustle passed through the foliage, and somewhere, between the inky black trunks, a pair of golden eyes shone like two old lanterns. Aiden stepped carefully along the treacherous path, feeling the damp earth beneath his feet. This was not the first time he had ventured into this forest, but something, a deep-rooted instinct, had begun to tell him that this night would be different. "Is it far to the cabin?" Elise's voice asked from behind him, with a hint of uncertainty. Aiden glanced over his shoulder, seeing her pull her jacket tighter around her body. Her green eyes were wide, and her brown hair had begun to stick to her forehead because of the cold mist. "We don't have much left, it's just beyond that crossroads," he said, trying to hide his hesitation. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees leaning over the path like curious giants. An owl hooted somewhere above, and Elise jumped. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she murmured. "Maybe we should have listened to the locals." Aiden laughed briefly, although the echo of his voice seemed strangely shrill in the silence of the forest. "Elise, they are just stories, and no demon haunts the forest, no spirit will take our souls. The people here just love legends." But, despite his display of confidence, he couldn't deny that the stories he had heard about the shadows of the forest were swirling in his mind. Legends of beings that were neither living nor dead, wandering among the trees, seeking the souls of the unwary. When they reached the crossroads, Aiden stopped suddenly. The ground was marked with strange marks, drawn with uncanny precision. The circle of symbols looked old, but the fresh lines showed that someone or something had drawn them recently. "What the hell is this?" Elise murmured, pulling back. Aiden bent down, lightly touching the ground. He didn't have time to think too long, because suddenly, a strong wind burst through the trees, extinguishing the flame of the torch he carried, and in the absolute darkness, a long, diffuse shadow seemed to creep through the trees, its outline trembling like smoke. A faint murmur, like a long hiss, was heard close to Aiden's ears. Elise let out a short cry, and Aiden tried to light the torch again, but his hands were shaking. When the light came on, the shadows seemed to have disappeared, but the air was heavy, almost suffocating. "We have to leave now," Elise said in a low voice. But Aiden, although scared, he felt a strange urge to stay. A silent, almost hypnotic call came from the trees. Part of him knew he should listen to Elise's instinct, but something else, something deeper, older, made him want to know more. He looked into Elise's eyes, seeing the sincere fear in them, sighed, giving in. "Okay, let's go." They turned, but just at that moment, a faint voice, from the fog, echoed from the shadows of the trees. Aiden. Elise froze in place, and Aiden felt a cold shiver run down the back of his neck. His name, spoken in an eerie way, as if it came from several mouths in one voice. An illusion? The wind. He didn't have time to think too long, because something moved quickly between the trees, and a deep roar made the forest vibrate. Aiden and Elise ran, their feet hitting the soft ground, their noisy breaths mixing with the sounds of the night. The cabin was close, he could be seen through the trees, the weak light of the lantern at the entrance guiding them. When they reached the threshold, Aiden and Elise collapsed inside, slamming the door behind them. They were breathing heavily, looking at each other. What the hell had that been? A hallucination? A cruel joke of their minds? But, in a corner of the cabin, hidden by the shadows, a faint sound was heard again. Aiden. Now they knew, they were not alone. Night had descended over the village like a heavy sheet, embracing the modest houses and the forests that stretched beyond the border. A pale moon cast elongated shadows, and the wind sighed through the bare branches of the trees. Aiden tightened his cloak around his shoulders and turned his gaze to Elise, who was silently approaching the fire flickering weakly in the hearth. "Did you hear it too?" she whispered, barely breathing. Aiden shook his head, trying to chase away the shiver that had run down his spine. It was the first time either of them had felt like something was following them, strange feeling, like a cold shadow penetrating their bones. Yet there was no one outside. Only the forest, dark and silent, waiting. Elise gently pulled the wooden shutters of the window and looked through the cracks. The silence of the night was oppressive. Not even the crickets were chirping, and the wind seemed to have stopped in the air. Aiden ran his fingers through his tousled hair, trying to chase away his fears. "It's just paranoia, Elise. Maybe some stray animal. But Elise didn't seem convinced. She moved closer to the fire, the orange light bathing her delicate features. He rubbed his hands together, as if the cold had penetrated his flesh, and murmured. The village elders talk about it. About the nights when the forest remains silent. They say that's when the old spirits wake up. Aiden raised an eyebrow, but listened carefully. Normally, he would have laughed at the local superstitions, but now, something told him that Elise was right. Strange sensation, like an invisible presence that was getting closer and closer. Before he could say anything, a light rustling was heard from the door, as if something or someone had moved on the threshold. Aiden stood up suddenly, and Elise stifled a scream, raising her hand to her mouth. For a few moments, nothing was heard. Then, a light, rhythmic knock. Once. Twice. Aiden felt his throat dry. He gathered his courage and approached slowly, with slow steps, barely felt. With a firm hand, he grabbed the cold handle and pulled the door. The door opened. Aiden was ready to face whatever was beyond it, but there was no one there. The darkness of the forest greeted them with cold, damp arms, and the dead leaves rustled gently in the barely perceptible breeze. Elise pressed her hand to her chest, trying to calm her heart that was beating wildly. Aiden stepped outside, his breath caught, and looked around. Then he saw her, a shadow, a faint shape, like smoke rising from the ground. She stood at the edge of the light cast by the cabin's weak torches. She had no face, but something about her presence made the air suddenly cool. Aiden, Elise whispered, barely managing to move her lips. Aiden felt like he had to say something, but the words were stuck in his throat. The silhouette began to tremble slightly, like a flame about to go out, and then her voice was heard for the first time. T was a sound that seemed to come from nowhere, carried by the wind, whispered among the shadows. The wizard.Varkas is waiting for you. Elise flinched, her fingers tightening on Aiden's arm. But he couldn't move. The name. She had heard it before, in the evenings when the elders told stories by the stove, in the nights when parents warned their children not to go near the forest. Varkas, the wizard from the depths of the forest, the one who controlled the shadows, the one who could speak with spirits. It was said that no one could hide from him, because he knew the thoughts of those who walked his land. The shadow continued to tremble, and the blue dots that served as its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Then, without another sound, it was gone. He dissolved like mist in the sunlight, leaving only the deep, cold night behind. Aiden felt his muscles suddenly relax, and the air seemed easier to breathe. He turned his gaze to Elise, whose face was as white as lime. "We have to go," he said, his voice hoarse. "Now." Elise nodded, unable to utter a word. Something told them that if they stayed there, the spirit would not be the last strange presence to appear on their path. They hurriedly gathered a few things, a cloak, a bag of herbs, and a hunting knife. They did not know exactly where they would go, but one thing was certain: they could not stay there. Not that night. The forest stretched out before them, gloomy and dark, like a forbidden land. And yet, they had no choice. With hesitant but determined steps, they stepped into the shadows of the trees, feeling invisible eyes following them from the depths of the night. Aiden and Elise's escape through the dense forest seemed to have no end. The deep and silent darkness of the night enveloped them, and each step on the wet ground covered with dry leaves seemed to echo like a condemnation. Fear tightened their chests, and their breathing became increasingly labored. The forest was like a labyrinth with no exit, with branches that seemed to stretch out threateningly over them. Every rustle of leaves, every rustle of branches increased their panic even more, and the shadows of the trees seemed to take on strange, almost human shapes. "We have to get to the village," Aiden whispered, but his voice sounded like an echo lost in the sea of darkness. Elise nodded, without uttering a word. Every moment seemed like an eternity, and the thought that the wizard.Varkas was following them told them that they had no time to waste. They had to reach the village before the darkness caught up with them. In an old house, in a forgotten corner of the forest, Varkas stood in front of a crystal ball, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Every movement of the shadow that walked through the forest was clear to him, as if he had control over every rustling branch, over every breeze of wind. His house was a fortress of magic and darkness, an imposing construction of black stone, covered in ivy that seemed to move of its own accord, with fingers clinging to the walls. The window hardware was hammered with runes old, and the doors, although massive, had hinges that creaked with every breeze. The smell of dried herbs and smoke from the fire mixed with a smell of damp stone and a feeling of oldness. Inside, the air seemed heavy, as if the entire house were filled with forgotten memories and long-lost spells. Red velvet fabrics could be seen on the walls, and in the middle of the room, a black stone altar was covered with strange objects: a dagger with a bone handle, a dusty book with pages yellowed by time, a bowl of water black as embers that seemed to contain shadows. But all of these were only accessories to what really attracted attention. The crystal ball.It stood on a wooden pedestal and shone with a pale light, but it emanated a cold energy that penetrated the bones of the one who looked into it. Varkas fixed his gaze on the ball, and his eyes, a piercing green, were deep in the abyss of the crystal image. The shadow he had sent into the forest moved, hissing like a cold, piercing wind. The wizard felt, beyond any doubt, that Elise and Aiden were close, that they were in a frenzied struggle to escape his magic. His smile, cold and calculated, widened on his face. He knew that fear could make him lose himself in the forest. But behind that simple strategy, he was planning something deeper, more dangerous. Varkas didn't just want to scare them, he wanted to know their most hidden fears. He wanted to trap them in the trap of their minds. "They will come to me," he whispered to himself, his voice echoing off the empty walls of the room. "And then it will be too late." With a broad gesture, he closed his eyes and clenched his fists. The crystal ball lost its clarity, and instead of the clear image, a dense and moving fog had appeared. Each wave in the crystal seemed to become a part of the spell he was weaving. Varkas wanted more than anything to catch Aiden and Elise, to immerse them in his spell so that they would be easy prey. Meanwhile, in the forest, Aiden and Elise were hurrying to reach the village, not knowing that the darkness that surrounded them would become increasingly dense, and the shadow that was following them would not give up until it brought them right to the wizard's feet. Chapter 2. The Forest of Ancient Winds. Every step Aiden and Elise took seemed to take them deeper into the darkness of the forest, and fear followed them from the shadows of the trees. The forest, with its twisted branches and old roots like stone arms, seemed to close in on them. Although they had told themselves that they should not stop, that the road to the village was close, something in the damp and cold air told them otherwise. "Aiden," Elise murmured, almost without strength. "I can't smell the village anymore." Looking around, Aiden also felt a growing unease. With each step, the forest seemed to grow darker, and the path they were following quickly disappeared beneath their feet. Without realizing it, they had been drawn to a place that even the elders of the village did not dare to mention very often. This was the Forest of Ancient Winds, a place to be feared, where the winds were not just winds, but carried within them whispers from other worlds, from forgotten times. The branches of the trees seemed alive, like hands reaching towards the sky. The leaves, denser and more tangled than ever, wove a carpet of shadows, and the wind that blew through the yellowed branches carried an almost human murmur. Elise felt a silent panic grip her throat, with a tightness in her back. "Aiden, I don't like it here," she whispered, her eyes wide, looking for something familiar around her. "We're not in the forest near the village here. Something's wrong." Aiden rubbed his face with his palms, trying to chase away his anxiety. He was aware that they had taken the wrong path, but he had no choice but to continue. He had seen how the shadows moved in the forest, how that oppressive silence was weaving a subtle trap for them, like a snake waiting for the right moment to strike its prey. "I don't feel comfortable either," Aiden said, "but we have no other choice. If we find a gate or a path that will take us out of the forest, we will take it that way. We will come out into the light," he said, his voice more confident than he really felt. But the forest, like a merciless labyrinth, told them something else. Every movement seemed to be guided by ancient winds, and these winds were not normal. A soft hiss could be heard through the bare branches, but beneath that sound, Elise began to hear other things. Whispers. Voices. Aiden and Elise stopped suddenly. A cold wind passed through their backs. "I hear them," Elise said. Aiden looked at her, but said nothing. He knew what she meant, because he too felt the same voices. They were old voices, almost forgotten, that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth and the sky, but also from the trees that stood still, as witnesses to an eruption of magic from forgotten times, words that, despite the silence, resonated deep in their souls. "They are not just voices," Elise said, almost in a whisper. "They seem to be speaking to us." Aiden clenched his fist, determined not to let himself be overwhelmed by phobias. "We must move forward. We will get out of the forest. We just have to find the right path." With hesitant steps, they continued forward, but the forest seemed to play tricks on them. Every time they thought the road was easy, a new path appeared before them, like an illusion, or maybe they were not even in the same forest anymore. Maybe everything had changed around them. Suddenly, a strong wind blew over them, bringing with it a cold breeze that made the leaves rustle with frightening force. Aiden stopped, feeling his heart beating frantically. Elise clung to him, and her eyes filled with tears, and her throat tightened in silent pain. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They are not just voices. It is as if the forest itself were speaking to us." At that moment, a faint light, like a flickering flame, appeared in the distance. It was a cold white light that pulsed slowly, without it being clear where it came from. Elise saw it first. "Aiden, look," she whispered. He looked, and, with his eyes fixed on that strange light, he understood that they both had no choice but to head towards it. Their path had changed course without them knowing it, and now they were heading towards something far more frightening than any shadow that could appear in the forest. They were heading towards the heart of the forest of ancient winds. "What comes next won't be easy," Aiden muttered, heading towards the light, although he felt fear beginning to penetrate his bones. And so, in front of a world that seemed to breathe and move at its own pace, Elise and Aiden walked further, deeper into the forest that knew more about them than they had ever imagined. Chapter 3. The House of the Wizard-Varkas. The flickering lights that seemed to float in the air guided Aiden and Elise through the dense darkness of the forest. A white light like a sliver of the moon in the deepest night. It was a strange, cold, and unnatural light that did not seem to come from an ordinary flame. Although the forest around them was immersed in silence, that light spoke to them, asked them to follow it, and every step they took deepened them into the strange silence of the place. Aiden tightened his cloak around his shoulders, feeling a heavy weight in his chest. Elise walked alongside him, with cautious steps, each glance thrown around filled with anxiety. The forest had become much deeper, and the surrounding trees seemed taller, older, like stone giants, and their branches stumbled in a network of shadows that covered the sky. "Aiden," Elise whispered, almost choked with sobs. "This is not a normal place. Where is this light taking us?" "I don't know," Aiden replied, looking ahead, focusing on the bright light that seemed to attract them like a magnet. "We must move forward. We cannot turn back now," Aiden said as they approached the white light. The forest began to open up, and the space became wider and more vast. Something in the air seemed to change, like a deep breath of the earth. After a few moments of walking, the dense forests lifted, and a strange vision appeared before them. The house, made of black stone and covered in ivy, stood silent and imposing in the middle of the forest. At first glance, it seemed almost impossible that such a large building could exist in such an isolated place, but there it was, imposing and cold, like a fortress of magic and mystery. The roof, dusty and aged, was covered in a blanket of moss and grass, and the old ironwork on the window sills seemed to rustle in the breeze like whispers. Each window was shrouded in deep shadows, and a single pale light shone through a narrow window at the top, at the back of the house. The house seemed to have been built in ancient times, and its stones were polished by time and magic, as if it were not just an ordinary building, but a cursed place. The entrance, a massive iron gate, struck with frightening runes, stood firmly closed, but in front of it were no keys, no signs of a padlock. It seemed that nothing more than a gesture was needed for it to open. Around the house, the grass seemed to be covered with a kind of frost, and the flowers, although beautiful, had an unnatural sheen, almost glassy. Taking hesitant steps, Aiden and Elise approached the gate that seemed to know their presence, and the wind, like a long hiss, whispered to them from all sides. It was as if the entire forest knew who they were and why they were there. "Should we go in?" Elise asked, her voice trembling. Her eyes searched Aiden's for an answer, but he couldn't find the right words. Either way, they didn't have many options. "We don't have any other choice," Aiden replied, determined. "If this place is truly Varkas's, then he must know about us. We will find answers here." Elise nodded, but said nothing. Her gaze was fixed on the great iron door, and fear was beginning to grip her more and more tightly. They had always heard stories of the wizard Varkas, of his power, of the shadows he controlled, and of how he fed on the fears of those who trespassed on his territory. Now, however, they would find out how true those legends were. Aiden reached out and grasped the cold doorknob. Resolutely, he felt something pierce him from within, as if the ancient spells of the place were coming to life. With a dull thud, the gate opened, and before them stretched a long corridor, submerged in the shadow of a pale blue, cold and piercing, that seemed to freeze the air as they stepped inside. Their eyes they were struck by an unexpected spectacle. The stone walls were covered with sigils and runes, and the floor was covered with carpets woven with gold and silver threads, and the middle of the room was a long wooden table, where old books and stone tablets with incomprehensible inscriptions were scattered. The air was heavy, mixed with the scents of herbs, but also with something much older, a smell of extinguished fire and damp earth. In front of them, a weak fire burned in a large hearth, and next to it stood a tall figure, shrouded in black robes. A hood that shaded his face. Varkas, the wizard, was sitting there, his eyes closed, as if waiting to sense his presence before opening his mouth. "You have finally arrived," he said in a low voice that seemed to vibrate in the charged air of the room. Aiden and Elise didn't know what to say. All they felt was that once they had crossed the threshold of this house, there was no turning back. The wizard Varkas stood before them, a tall and imposing shadow, wrapped in a black cloak, with a deep hood that almost completely covered his face. The pale light that penetrated through the window's hardware reflected on his pale skin, like a strange light, penetrating the depths of darkness. Aiden and Elise felt that they had nowhere to hide, that they were already caught in the game of this powerful wizard. "You arrived faster than I expected," Varkas said, and his voice pierced the air like a cold echo, like a whistle carried by the wind. "Your journey began with a strange call, but I know what brings you here." Aiden clenched his fist, and Elise trembled slightly next to him. Every word the wizard said seemed to hit him from all directions, deepening their fear and anxiety. Varkas knew too much for them to feel safe. "What do you want from us?" Aiden asked, trying to hide his fear. "Why did you bring us here? How do you know who we are?" Varkas raised a long, thin hand, covered in black leather gloves, and made a gesture as if revealing a secret. "You were drawn to my call, young men. Not by chance. The forest of ancient winds has welcomed you into its arms, and you are only one step closer to the truth you seek." Elise tightened her fingers on Aiden's arm, feeling the entire room seem to be enveloped in a vortex of silent energy. "What truth?" she murmured, her voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" Varkas raised his eyes, letting his head move slightly in their direction. "You are the ones who will change the fate of this place. It is not by chance that you have come to me. Your journey was long foretold, and you are the link between two worlds." Aiden took a step forward. "Two worlds. What does that mean? What do you want from us, Varkas?" The wizard shrugged, and a mysterious smile, almost imperceptible, was outlined on his lips. "I do not ask for anything, young people. I am only a witness to an ancient prophecy I called the spirits, and they chose you. Those who will rise against a great threat. But for that, you must understand. Understand that what the forest offers you is not only a path, but also a confrontation." "A confrontation?" Aiden repeated, not really understanding. "What threat?" Varkas nodded and slowly rose, heading towards a large wooden table, covered with old books, parchments, and mysterious objects. With a graceful movement, he touched one of the objects on the table, a large crystal bowl, filled with a whitish liquid. The liquid moved slowly, and a bright light played on its surface. "This is what you must face," he said, looking at the two young men. "Your world and the world beyond is about to fall apart, and a distant time, ancient spirits united to protect this world. But now something is awakening. Something much older and much more dangerous than either of us." Aiden and Elise exchanged worried glances. The wizard's every word echoed in their heads. "What does this mean? What must we do?" Elise asked, almost in a whisper, but with a determination growing clearer in her voice. Varkas walked slowly toward them, his eyes seeming to glow in the dim light of the fire that burned in the corner of the room. "You have the power to face that creature, and yet, you are not prepared. You do not yet fully understand what awaits you. This is not a simple battle between good and evil. It is a battle between your reality and the hidden world. The real question is, are you willing to pay the price?" Elise felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "The price? What price?" she asks, but before Varkas could answer, a strange vibration was felt in the air. The air in the room was becoming denser and heavier, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. "Prepare yourselves," Varkas said, and his voice now seemed like a deep echo, coming from an incomprehensible place. "Because what follows is just the beginning." To that moment, a blinding light burst from the crystal ball. The air twisted and trembled around them, and an unseen force entered the room, like a huge pressure that made Aiden and Elise feel their heads heavy. Something was awakening, and there was nothing that could stop them. In the midst of that blinding light, something unexpected was happening. A shadow was separating from the crystal ball, and as the light faded, a little girl appeared before them. She was about 8 or 9 years old, with long curly dark brown hair that fell in curls to her shoulders. She wore a green dress, covered with moss and forest leaves that seemed to grow directly from the fabric of her clothes. Every movement of the little girl left behind a fresh smell of earth and grass, as if she herself were part of nature. Aiden and Elise looked at her in amazement, bewildered by her sudden appearance. The little girl looked at them with large, bright eyes, full of an ancient wisdom that seemed to surpass her fragile age. The words did not seem to come from a child, but from a being who carried a deep knowledge of the world and those who populate it. "You are the ones who came to restore balance, are you not?" said the little girl, in a melodious and calm voice. "I am Aria, and I come from a world that was once one with yours. But now it is no longer so." Aiden and Elise exchanged confused glances, but before either of them could ask, Aria raised her hand and, with a subtle gesture, pointed to the crystal ball on the table in front of them. "There," she said, "that is where I come from. In that ball lies the memory of our world." Varkas rose from behind them and, with a wave of his hand, activated the ball again. The white liquid had begun to move again, and the image became clearer. Aiden and Elise watched carefully, and in the crystal ball appeared the image of a fairyland, with dense forests and rivers that undulated through green and mysterious landscapes. Strange animals of immense size walked through tall grasses, and golden birds flew in the clear sky. Everything seemed pure and untouched by the external forces of the human world. "This is Animal Land," Varkas said in a serious tone. "A place where helpless beings, those who have often been hunted and exploited by humans, live in safety. Your world, the world of humans, was full of violence, war, and destruction. Animals had no place of their own, and forests were cut down and destroyed to make way for cities and villages." "So, you created a place where animals are safe?" Elise asked, still puzzled, but now listening more attentively. "And how did our world come to be separated from theirs?" Varkas leaned slightly toward the globe and let his gaze slide over the image of Animal Land. "I created Animal Land for a purpose. The forests and plains were being destroyed by the greed of humans. The animals had no safe place to live, so I used magic to create a parallel world, a place where the animals could live in peace, away from your aggressions." "But how did the two worlds come to be separated?" Aiden asked, raising an eyebrow. Varkas looked carefully at the globe, and the image changed again. Now the globe showed a much more tumultuous scene, an explosion of light and shadow, an invisible border appearing between the two worlds. The forests on one side and the cities on the other. "The separation came when the balance was threatened," Varkas said, his voice becoming graver. "Humans began to abuse my magic, seeking to penetrate the animal land to exploit it, to rule it. The forest rebelled, so I took action, sealed the two worlds, leaving only a narrow window through which a chosen few could pass." Aria looked up at Aiden and Elise, her piercing eyes like a window to an unknown world. "But to maintain that balance, humans and animals must reconcile. Without that, everything will fall into chaos. Your world will fall apart and bring destruction to our land." "And why did you choose us?" Elise asked, still unsure, but braver. "What can we do to restore the balance?" Aria smiled sadly. "Because you have the power to understand. Because you are the link between the two worlds. Without you, it cannot be. You must restore that connection between humans and animals. You must find a way to make humans understand that they are not masters of the world, but only part of a whole." Varkas sat down behind them again, silent for a moment, and the light of the globe began to fade. "In a world where even animals cannot be happy, how will humans ever be at peace with themselves?" he had said, letting their gazes remain captivated by the globe in which their world and that of the animals were woven in a fragile web of magic. Aiden and Elise sat silent, thinking about the enormity of the mission that awaited them. How could they bring about this change? How could they repair the deep chasm that had deepened between the two worlds? Chapter 4. The Land of the Living Nature. Aiden and Elise stared in fascination at Aria, who was changing right before their eyes. The girl in the moss dress began to tremble slightly, and the light from the crystal ball enveloped her body in a silver aura. A moment later, where the girl had been, stood a white she-wolf, her fur shining like fresh hay and her eyes yellow as fire. Elise took a step back, and Aiden stood still, feeling his heart pounding wildly in his chest. The she-wolf Aria shook her fur and looked deep into their souls, as if she had read all their thoughts and fears. "Do not be afraid," she said in the same melodious yet gentle voice. "I am the same Aria you met. I have always been this way. A she-wolf who can take the form of a child in order to speak to humans." Varkas rested his hands on his oaken staff and looked at them. "Now you understand," he said. "The animal land is not only a place separate from your world, but also part of the balance of nature. And the forest of ancient winds. It is the last remnant of the connection between humans and nature.It is the realm of animated nature." Aiden wrung his hands. "Animate nature? What does that mean?" "It means that everything you see there lives, breathes and feels," Aria said, taking a few steps forward. "The trees can talk, the flowers can sing, and the wind can whisper to you stories as old as time immemorial. But now, the forest is sad, and it cries." Elise swallowed hard. "It cries for the animals, doesn't it?" Varkas nodded. "Yes. Without animals, the forest is deserted. Without creatures to care for it and live in harmony with it, the trees lose their voices, and the earth becomes cold. Your world has taken too much from nature, and now the balance is broken." Aiden and Elise looked at each other, beginning to understand the gravity of their mission. "And what should we do?" Aiden asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You must restore the connection between humans and nature," Aria said, approaching them. "We must find a way for the animals to return to the forest without fear of being hunted or driven away." Elise bit her lip. "But how can we do that? Humans will not simply stop hunting or destroying the forests." Varkas looked up at the crystal ball, where a blurry image now appeared, like a shadow. "There is a way. But for that, you must go into the heart of the forest of ancient winds." "And what will we find there?" Aiden asked, feeling a shiver run down his spine. Varkas let his voice become a deep whisper. "An ancient force.1 that can change everything, or destroy everything." Aria raised her head, her yellow eyes burning like two flames in the night. "We have no choice, we must go now. The forest awaits us." And without another word, Aiden and Elise took their cloaks and set off into the night, following the white she-wolf into the unknown deep within the forest. Chapter 5. Nature's Altar. The forest of ancient winds enveloped the three travelers in a fairy tale silence. The tall trees joined their branches above them, forming a natural roof through which the moon's rays barely filtered. Aria moved her ears attentively to every rustle, and Aiden and Elise walked carefully, feeling that this place was more alive than any other place they had ever known. After a while, they reached the edge of a precipice, and below them, in the heart of the forest, stretched a sparkling waterfall. The crystal-clear water fell in silver layers, filling the air with gentle music, like a song of nature. In the middle of the lake formed by the waterfall, an ancient stone altar rose majestically, surrounded by lianas and blue flowers that seemed to glow in the darkness. "This is the shrine of nature," Aria whispered, looking reverently at the sacred place. A warm breeze suddenly rose, and from the trembling air a stunningly beautiful woman appeared. Her blonde hair fell in silky waves over her shoulders, dressed in a white robe, decorated with golden leaves. Her green eyes shone like emeralds, and her skin had a delicate glow, as if she were part of the very nature that surrounded her. "Welcome, travelers of the forest," she said in a melodious voice that seemed to be carried by the wind. "I am Aria, queen of the realm of animated nature." Aiden and Elise knelt instinctively, feeling a gentle but immense power emanating from her. Aria bowed her head slightly, a sign of respect. "Why were we brought here?" Aiden asked, amazed. Ilaria raised her hand, and thin strands of grass sprouted from the ground, weaving into a green crown, which she placed in the water. "The forest wants to be whole again. It wants the animals to return, but also the people. Those who cared for it, those who lived in harmony with it. Without animals, the clearings are no longer grazed, the grass grows uncontrollably, and the forest suffers. And without people, the old trees fall, the streams are clogged, and no one listens to the voice of nature anymore. Elise bit her lip. But people were the ones who hurt the forest. They hunted the animals, destroyed the trees. How can we have trust that they won't do the same again? Aria sighed, and around her the leaves rustled softly, like a whisper of pain. Not all people are evil, child. There was a time when they were part of this land, when they cared for it, as nature cared for them. But forgetfulness and greed have driven them away. Now we must find our way back. Aiden crossed his arms. And how can we do that? Aria looked at them deeply, as if searching their souls. In the heart of the forest lies the elder tree, the one who witnessed the birth of this land. He is the only one who can restore the connection between humans and nature. But to awaken it, you need 3 lost keys. And they will not be easy to find. Aria raised her head suddenly. Keys. Aria nodded. The first key is hidden in the bowels of the earth, where ancient roots coil and hold lost memories. The second is in the hands of those who still remember the song of nature, the last keepers of balance. And the third is the most dangerous. He is in the clutches of the shadows, beings who do not want the balance to be restored. A cold shiver passed through Aiden and Elise. But Aria seemed determined. Then we must set off, said the white wolf. We cannot let the forest die. Aria smiled sadly. The road will be long and full of trials, but the forest is with you. And remember, only together, people and animals, will you be able to bring balance back. Then, with a gentle breeze, her presence dissipated, leaving behind only the light of the stars and the song of the waterfall. Chapter 6. The Road to the Village. Aiden, Elise, Aria and Queen Aria made their way through the endless forest, guided by the pale moonlight. Each step was accompanied by the sound of the rustling of leaves and the unseen voice of the trees, which murmured old secrets, carried by the wind. The road was long and fatigue began to weigh on them, but Queen Aria seemed invisible to the burdens. She floated with a supernatural grace among the roots sticking out of the ground, and her blonde hair shone softly, like gold under the starlight. Tell me about your world, she murmured, turning her gaze to Aiden and Elise. How do people live now, after being separated from nature? Elise sighed, feeling a lump in her throat. Our world is no longer what it once was. Without animals, the land is worked only by people. But not all people are equal. Aiden clenched his fists, anger visible in his eyes. There are 2 castes. The rich who have taken power into their own hands, and the poor, who work to exhaustion and the absence of animals. The peasants are the ones who pull the plows, the ones who carry burdens on their backs, the ones who till the land with their own hands. They are used as animals once were. Aria pricked up her ears, her yellow eyes sparkling in the darkness. So the people have become slaves to their own mistakes? Elise nodded, feeling sadness weigh down her soul. Yes, and although some would like the animals to return, the rich refuse. They are in control, and the simple people no longer know how to live any other way. Aria was silent for a moment, then ran her delicate fingers over the bark of an old tree. People have brought their own world to its knees, she murmured. Nature was not meant to be torn apart, and the broken balance must be restored. Aiden sighed and ran a hand through his hair. That's why we're here, right? To find the first key and start changing things. But it won't be easy. The rich people won't want to give up power. Aria stopped suddenly, sniffing the air. We're approaching the village, she said, her eyes glinting in the darkness. I smell smoke and people. Beyond the trees, in the distance, the flickering lights of the first village could be seen, place where hope had long since died, and where Aiden and Elise must find their way to the first clue to the elder key. They stepped forward, aware that their next step would change their fate forever. Aiden, Elise, Aria, and Queen Aria approached the village. The air grew heavier, heavy with the smell of smoke and scorched earth. The flickering torchlight cast dark shadows on the wooden houses, piled together like weary souls leaning on each other to keep from collapsing. The road leading to the entrance was covered in dust and mud, beaten by the feet of those who had worked from morning until night. The houses, though modest, they kept the signs of hardship: patched roofs, peeling doors and broken fences, through which the wind crept with a sad whistle, and the center was a small market, where a few villagers spread their wares on wooden tables. There were no animals, just piles of wheat, drought-stricken vegetables, and a few loaves of bread as hard as stone. The people wore old, patched clothes, and their faces were drawn and pale, marked by fatigue and deprivation. Aiden bit his lip, knowing this landscape all too well. Everything is the same, he muttered. People work, but they have nothing. In one corner of the market, several men bound in chains were forced to turn a heavy stone mill, while a supervisor with a club drove them on. Elise clenched her fists. It's like that everywhere, she said in a trembling voice. The poor do the hard work, and the rich rule over them. Aria watched the scene with sad eyes, but said nothing. She only raised her hand, and a gentle breeze crept through the village, like a comfort to the tired. Beyond the market, towards the end of the village, an imposing villa stood on a small hill. Unlike the shabby houses, this one was built of solid stone, with large windows and a roof reinforced with slate tiles. It was clear that the one who held power over the village lived there. Aria growled slightly. We need to find out where the first key is, she said. But it won't be easy. Aiden straightened his back, looking at the villagers. The people here are scared. But maybe someone can tell us where to look. As they mingled among the inhabitants, no one paid them any attention, but the same thing was read in everyone's eyes: fear and resignation. Something dark was hovering over the village of the west, and if they wanted to find the first key, they had to discover the truth hidden in the shadows of this place. Chapter 7. Meeting the Wise Old Man. Aiden, Elise, Aria and Aria slowly advanced through the village, mixing among the locals. The wolf Aria, now in the guise of a little girl with yellow eyes and a green dress made of forest moss, walked silently alongside them, looking at the world of people with a restrained curiosity. Queen Aria, although she had retained her eternal beauty, was now dressed simply, with a long linen dress and a thin shawl on her shoulders, like the women of the village. Between the crowded square and the imposing stone villa, an old man with a long white beard stood in their way. He had wise eyes, full of stories, and a carved wooden staff, on which he leaned lightly. You are strangers in these lands, he said, looking deeply into Aiden's eyes. This is not a good place for you. But come on, come with me. Without giving them a chance to answer, the old man turned and walked slowly towards the edge of the village, motioning for them to follow him. Curious and cautious, the four followed him to a small hut, built of woven wattle and daub and thatched. The walls were reinforced with mud, but time had cracked them in places, allowing the wind to seep through the cracks. Once they arrived, the old man pushed open the low wooden door and motioned for them to enter. Inside, the hut was warm and welcoming. Dried herbs, small wooden sculptures, and canvases with old drawings hung on the walls. Simple oak table stood in the middle of the room, and next to the fire in the hearth, a teapot of clay was emitting fragrant steam. Who are you? Elise asked, looking around. The old man smoothed his beard and motioned for them to sit down. My name is Aria, I am Varkas' brother. Aiden and Elise looked at each other in surprise. Aria placed her hands on her knees, and her eyes briefly shone in the firelight. If you are his brother, why do you live here, among humans? Aria asked. Aria sighed and ran her hand over his staff. Because I chose not to follow him on the path of shadows, he answered. When Varkas divided the worlds, I stayed among humans, to help them. But since then, the world has changed. What was supposed to be a balance has turned into a chasm between humans, nature, and animals. Aria looked at him carefully, with sadness in her eyes. We have come to restore this balance, she said gently. We know that the first key is here, somewhere in this village. Can you help us? The old man smiled slightly, then looked down at the fire. I can tell you where to look for it, but the path will not be easy. The first key is hidden where light and darkness meet. And to reach it, you must enter the most dangerous place in this village. The master's villa. A heavy silence fell over the hut. Outside, the wind whistled through the branches, like a silent warning. The imposing stone villa, the place of the rich and oppressive, hid the first step towards change. And now, Aiden, Elise, Aria and Aria had to find a way to enter there without drawing attention to themselves. Aiden clenched his fists, trying to chase away his doubt. The imposing stone villa dominated the village from its high hill, guarded by burning torches and armed soldiers. If the first key was indeed there, then they had to get inside without getting caught. How can we get in? Elise asked, looking at Aria. The old man smoothed his white beard and looked over the four of them. "There is a way, but it is dangerous," he said quietly. "Beneath the villa there is an old tunnel, a network of forgotten caves that lead directly to the master's cellars. I just don't know if they are safe anymore. And there is something else." Aiden raised an eyebrow. "What exactly?" Arion sighed and leaned into the fire. "They say the tunnels are guarded by shadows. Remnants of Varkas magic, which haunts places forgotten by time." A heavy silence fell over the room. Aria crossed her small hands over her knees, her yellow eyes sparkling in the dim light. "We have no choice," she said firmly. "If we are to restore balance between the worlds, we must take risks." Ilaria nodded, then looked at the old man. "Show us the way to those tunnels." In the cold night, the four friends followed Arion to the edge of the village. The old man led them to a pile of old ruins, over which nature had taken control. Under the roots of an old tree, among the moss-covered stones, was a wooden hatch. "This is the old passage," Arion said, lifting the heavy lid. "Tread carefully." Aiden took a torch and descended first, followed by Elise, Aria, and Ilaria. The air was damp, smelling of earth and old stone. In the walls, traces of faded inscriptions reminded of times long gone. The tunnel stretched before them, dark and silent. Each step they took resonated deeply, like an echo from another world. Then, the first hiss was heard. A strange cold gripped their bodies, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move. Elise held her breath, and Aria felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "They are following us," Ilaria whispered. From the depths of the darkness, a pair of red eyes emerged, glowing faintly. A creature of smoke and darkness made its way towards them, slithering across the cold stone. Aiden drew the knife from his belt, but Ilaria stopped his hand. "You cannot fight shadows with a blade," she said. "You must drive them away with light." Without hesitation, the queen of the realm of the animate nature raised her hands and murmured something in an ancient language. From her palms, a warm light, green as raw leaf, spread around. The shadow hissed and retreated, melting into the stone. Elise sighed in relief. "Let's move on," Aiden said, gripping the torch tighter in her hand. And so they stepped deeper into the cave, knowing that the danger was not over. But somewhere in the heart of the villa, the first key awaited them. Chapter 8. Entering the Master's Mansion. The tunnel grew narrower and colder as Aiden, Elise, Aria, and Ilaria advanced. The ground beneath their feet was damp, and the air smelled of old stone and forgotten time. The sound of their footsteps echoed in dull echoes, as if the walls themselves were following them. "Do we have much more?" Elise whispered, trying to keep her breathing calm. Ilaria ran her hand over the tunnel walls, feeling the cold texture of the stone. "I feel like we're close." Aria, her childlike appearance contrasting with her yellow eyes, suddenly smelled a strange smell, like smoke mixed with hot metal. "There's someone up there," she murmured. Aiden clutched his torch and moved forward carefully. The tunnel ended in a steep stone staircase that led up to an old wooden trapdoor. "This must be the entrance to the villa's cellar," Ilaria said. Aiden slowly pushed the lid back and looked inside. The room above was dark, with shelves full of barrels and dusty crates. He seemed as if no one had been there in a long time. "Come on, it's safe," he whispered. One by one, they crept into the cellar. Once they were up, Aiden closed the trapdoor behind them and listened. Above, heavy footsteps echoed on the stone floor. The villa was awake. "We need to find the key," Elise said. Ilaria closed her eyes for a moment, concentrating. "Her magic is close, but she is not alone." Aria flinched. "Someone is guarding her." Aiden clenched his fists. He could not back down now. They crept through the barrels until they found a heavy wooden door that led to the inner stairs. Carefully, Elise pushed the handle, and the door creaked slightly. "This way." They stepped carefully down the dark corridor, avoiding making a sound. The stone walls were cold, and the air smelled faintly of burnt incense. They reached a large hall, lit only by a few torches. In the middle of the room, sitting on a black marble pedestal, a small, spherical, gold-colored object shone. "The first key." "I found her," Elise whispered, "but she is not alone." In the opposite corner of the hall, a figure moved. A tall shadow, with eyes as red as fire, stepped out of the darkness. "I knew you would come," a low voice said. Aiden felt a shiver run down his spine. The first guardian of the key was waiting for them in the dimly lit hall. The air seemed to thicken. Aiden and Elise stared in amazement at the tall figure emerging from the shadows. The man wore a black cloak embroidered with gold threads, and his cold eyes fixed them with a chilling intensity. "I was waiting for you," he said in a deep voice. Aiden felt a lump in his throat. The man in front of him was not only the lord of the land of men, he was his father. "Lord Edric," Elise whispered, taking a step back. "Father," Aiden said, his voice trembling with anger and confusion. Edric smiled coldly. "You've grown up, Aiden. And you, Elise. Have you never wondered why I kept you away from the castle? Why did you never learn your true heritage?" Elise felt her heart pounding. The true heritage? We had nothing. You let people suffer. You ruled this land with an iron fist. Edric lifted his chin, his gaze as if made of stone. "Because it was meant to be. Because the world is ruled by strength, not weakness." Aiden clenched his fists. "And our mother? Where is she?" A heavy silence fell. Edric narrowed his eyes, but before he could answer, Arion stepped forward. "Enough," he thundered, and his voice had the weight of a past hidden for too long. The old man raised his hands, and the air around him seemed to vibrate. "It's time to know the truth, Edric. The truth about their mother, and about what you really did." Elise stared at him with wide eyes. "Arion, what do you mean?" The old man lowered his shoulders and sighed deeply. "Your mother didn't die as you were told. She was no ordinary woman. She was the true queen of this land, a bridge between humans and living nature." "Nera?" Aiden froze. "Queen Nera?" Arion nodded. "Yes, Nera, queen of the land of people. She was the link between humans, animals, and the forest. But Edric feared her power. She wanted to control the world only through domination, without balance. And she did what any weak and greedy ruler does." Elise put her hand to her mouth, and Aria felt anger boiling in her chest. "He betrayed her," Arion whispered. "He broke the connection between the worlds and locked her in a dimension from which she could not return." Aiden felt everything inside him collapse. "No." Edric looked at them coldly. "It was necessary. She didn't understand what had to be done for people to survive. I created this system. The strong rule, the weak work. This is how the world works." "You are wrong," Aria said, her eyes shining with anger. "And now, you will pay for everything you have done." In an instant, Aria regained her white wolf form, her fur shining in the torchlight. Ilaria raised her arms and, in a burst of green light, her simple clothes disappeared, and her blonde hair fluttered like the wind in the middle of a storm. The queen of animated nature had regained her true appearance. Edric drew his sword, and the shadows in the corners of the room writhed, as if a dark power had come to life. "You will not take the key," he thundered. Aiden drew his sword as well. "Then we will take it by force." Arion raised his hands, and the floor trembled slightly. "The old magic will not help you, Edric. You have used the shadows for too long, and now they are demanding the price." At that moment, the shadows around Edric began to contort and encircle him like chains. He tried to escape, but it was too late. What have you done?" he shouted angrily. Arion dropped his hands. "You broke the balance between the worlds, and now, the balance will claim you." At that moment, Elise ran to the pedestal, picking up the golden key in her hands. It glowed warm, like a small sun. "I did it," she said, looking at her brother. Aiden looked at his father, now captive among the shadows he had served for so long. "We will not let you hurt again." Edric gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. The power he had summoned for so long was now betraying him. Ilaria turned to the others. "We must go. There are 2 more keys to find, and our journey has only just begun." With the golden key in their hands and their hearts filled with painful truths, Aiden and Elise knew that their path was only now becoming truly dangerous. Chapter 9. The Liberation of the Land of Men. In the pale light of dawn, news of the fall of Lord Edric spread through the village and beyond, to all corners of the land of men. The poor people, who had been chained for years in hard labor and suffering, now raised their heads with hope. For the first time, the yokes were falling, and the chains were broken. Ilaria, for that was now the name of the queen of the animated nature, stood in the middle of the market, watching as the people celebrated their freedom. She was beautiful and stately, her green eyes sparkling like emeralds in the sun. Aria, still in her human form, laughed along with the children who ran through the village, for the first time without fear. Aiden and Elise watched the scene with eyes full of emotion. "I can't believe it," Elise murmured. "I did it." Aiden nodded, his face still serious. "A battle is over, but our journey is not over. There are 2 more keys to find." Aria looked at them both gently. "But today we celebrate. The land of men is free again. But freedom could not come without justice. Those who had oppressed the people for so long could not go unpunished. The former nobles and guards who had served under Edric had been captured by the villagers and brought to the market. Among them was Lord Gavriel, Edric's right-hand man, the one who had imposed the harshest punishments on the peasants. "I beg you," he shouted, "I was only following orders." An angry murmur passed through the crowd, but Aria raised her hand, demanding silence. "Justice is not revenge," she said, her voice vibrating through the air. "Those who plundered, those who oppressed, and those who harmed the innocent will pay for their deeds, but not with death." The crowd awaited the verdict. "Those who have wronged will serve their time by working alongside the people they have oppressed, helping to rebuild the villages and fields. If any of you refuse, you will be banished from this land, never to return." The captives bowed their heads, knowing they had no other choice. "And Lord Edric?" someone in the crowd asked. All eyes turned to the former residence of the Lord of the Land of Men.